Why is it that the smartest people often struggle the most to just get started? If you have big ideas but find yourself cleaning the kitchen instead of working, it's not laziness, it's a sophisticated brain glitch. Your high intelligence is actually making you a professional procrastinator. Today, we are looking into the science of why smart brains freeze and how to hack your internal alarm system to finally start that big project. The smart person's curse. Why high IQ often leads to low action. High IQ often brings a sharp map of what a task will demand. The brain's planning networks fire, and the imagined path to completion can feel unusually precise and intimidating. The brain's fire alarm, the amygdala, tends to flare when uncertainty shows up. That alarm makes starting feel costly and risky. So thinking can loop into longer analysis and less action, a quiet saboteur that hides in plain sight. Enter the perfectionist trap. High standards sharpen thinking, but they also inflate imagined errors. The mind rehearses the first draft as if it must be flawless, and fear grows with every hypothetical flaw. The wall of dread swells, and beginning feels like stepping into judgment. The brain wants to delay until the plan looks perfect, but that moment never arrives. From a neuroscience view, starting lights up the reward circuits when progress is made. The brain rewards movement and small wins more than the distant dream of a perfect launch. Yet a high IQ brain can stall at the threshold, running long simulations before any action, because the cost of a wrong step feels high and the potential payoff feels abstract. The result is a quiet stalemate, where thinking advances but doing stalls. To rewire this, microstarts beat grand plans every time. Making a tiny move triggers a cleaner signal to the brain. You began, and that feels safer than you expected. Short-term wins release dopamine and pull you forward, even if the total task is still unfinished. Start with one tiny action that takes minutes, and you lower the wall of dread to a manageable height. A 2-minute timer can be generous enough to spark motion and strict enough to demand focus. Define the exact starting move the moment you sit down. Open the document, type a single sentence, outline one bullet. Reduce cognitive load by removing big choices before you begin. Create a small ritual, a fixed perch, a predictable cue, a minimal setup that signals it's time to start. Pair work with a light reward to give the brain a friendly nudge toward momentum. Ask a friend to check in, not to judge, but to validate a tiny step completed. The aim is to shift the brain from the fear side of the wall to the action side, one manageable move at a time. With repeated small starts, the brain learns that beginning isn't a big risk, and momentum tends to grow, brick by brick. The perfectionist loop. How your high standards are paralyzing your start. The tendency to demand perfection is common among high achievers, and it often stops them from even beginning. This is not laziness. It's a brain pattern that traps you in a loop. The perfectionist trap whispers that anything short of perfect will waste your time or wreck your reputation. That whisper grows into a heavy fog, the wall of dread, that makes every first move feel risky, uncertain, and potentially costly. When you start to doubt your initial effort, your brain shifts into protection mode, and starting feels like stepping into a high-stakes stage with no safety net. Behind the scenes, the brain treats an impossible standard as if it were a real, imminent danger. The brain's fire alarm jumps to life in anticipation of failure, so you stall to avoid the uncomfortable rush of fear that comes with imperfect beginnings. The prefrontal regions that should coordinate planning overcorrect, looking for a flawless blueprint before any action. Meanwhile, the reward system is tuned more to the idea of a perfect finish than to the tiny, real rewards of taking the first small step. The result is a cognitive standoff. You want the outcome, but the path to it feels blocked by standards you can't meet at the outset. There are practical ways to break out of this loop, and they don't require lowering your ambitions so much as tweaking how you engage with the task. Start by reframing what counts as progress. Treat the first action as a separate, low-stakes microgoal rather than the gateway to a perfect project. Call this the start you can't fail at, something so small it invites momentum instead of judgment. Give yourself permission to proceed even if the plan isn't flawless. Progress, not perfection, becomes the reward. Build a simple ritual that signals the brain, we begin now, whether that means opening a document, writing a sentence, or laying out the first page. Design the environment to reduce friction. Hide every potential distraction, set out the exact tools you need, and reduce the number of decisions you must make in the first 5 minutes. Another effective move is to shift the standard from outcome-based to process-based. Instead of measuring success by a perfect result, measure it by consistency of starting and continuing for a short, fixed period. Use external accountability, a check-in buddy or a timer that unlocks only after you begin, to make starting feel like a shared commitment rather than a solitary risk. If a misstep occurs, treat it as data, not doom. Ask what the first tiny action revealed about the plan, and adjust the next microstep accordingly. This approach turns the perfectionist trap into a series of small, actionable moves, each one less intimidating than the last, gradually rewiring the brain to value initiation as a legitimate victory. The goal is to shrink the wall of dread one notch at a time, so starting becomes less of a judgment call and more of a practiced habit that your nervous system recognizes as safe. Emotion, not time. Why procrastination is a mood regulation problem. Procrastination isn't just about laziness or a lack of time. It's deeply tied to how the brain manages mood and emotion. When a task feels emotionally charged, the brain races to protect you from discomfort. The amygdala, the brain's alarm center, lights up at the thought of starting something that could bring criticism, uncertainty, or failure. The prefrontal cortex, which handles planning and self-control, tries to quiet that alarm, but its signals can get tangled with feelings like worry or dread. In smart, high-achieving people, the contrast between a demanding standard and a messy, imperfect starting point can push mood in the direction of avoidance. The result is not that the task seems hard to do, but that beginning it feels emotionally costly. That emotional cost often shows up as a wall, the wall of dread, that stands between intention and action. The brain's fire alarm blares at the moment of starting, especially if the task is open-ended or uncertain. High standards compound the signal. When you're braced for a perfect outcome, the first step may look risky or ridiculous, so you postpone to protect your mood. The insula, which registers internal bodily states, can amplify discomfort, making a flutter in the chest or a knot in the stomach feel like a reason to wait. In such moments, the reward system also shifts gears. The short-term relief of avoiding a tough start can feel sweet, but the long-term mood cost accumulates as the task drags on, fueling guilt or self-criticism that feeds the next delay. The cycle is familiar and avoidable with a few brain-grounded shifts. The most practical fix starts with reframing the task in a way that lowers the emotional heat. The perfectionist trap is real. When standards are sky-high, the mind treats any imperfect first attempt as a catastrophe rather than a natural first draft. A simple counter-move is to name the emotion and reduce its grip. Say to yourself aloud that you're feeling a twinge of dread or a spark of self-criticism, and then commit to a tiny action that won't threaten those standards. Start with a microstep, like opening a document, writing a single sentence, or listing 3 ideas. The goal is not flawless perfection but momentum, just enough to tell the brain the risk of starting is overestimated. Another trick is to attach the task to a small, immediate reward and a concrete deadline. This reshapes the moment from a vague uphill battle into a concrete, buffer-protected routine. The wall of dread softens when the path to beginning is short and predictable. From a brainwire perspective, the strategy is to design an environment and a routine that reduce emotional friction while still honoring high standards. Create a starting ritual that costs almost nothing: a tidy workstation, a timer set for a brief span, a single opening line written on a note, or a half-page outline. Use implementation intentions, if-then plans that specify exactly when and where you start and what you will do first. Label emotions, lower the perceived risk of starting, and reframe the task as a series of small, controllable moves rather than one big leap. For smart people, the move is not to lower ambition but to compress starting into a gentler, mood-friendly sequence. By gradually training the brain to tolerate the emotional edge of beginning, the amygdala learns that starting isn't a threat, and the prefrontal system can guide action with less internal drama. Finish with a quick debrief. Note what felt easier, what still stings, and how small wins change the mood for the next step. The amygdala hijack: why your brain sees a blank page as a threat. The amygdala is a tiny, almond-shaped cluster deep in the brain. It acts as the brain's fire alarm, always on the lookout for danger. When you stare at a blank page, the signal it sends can feel like a siren about to go off. Uncertainty, fear of making a mistake, worry about judgment, that alarm kicks in fast. The amygdala hijack happens when that alarm overrides the planning part of your brain, the prefrontal cortex. Momentum freezes, breathing quickens, thoughts scatter, and all that effort you've built up to write collapses into a wall of dread. This isn't a flaw, it's a built-in reflex. Smart people feel it, too, because the alarm doesn't know your IQ or your resume. It just reads threat signals and responds. The moment the page stays blank, the wall begins to rise. The brain treats ambiguity as danger, and the wall of dread grows taller with every uncertain sentence you fear you might type. The threat isn't just failing, it's the possibility of exposing imperfections. That's where the perfectionist trap takes hold. High standards turn even tiny choices into heavyweight questions about outcomes, and the mind starts rehearsing worst-case judgments. The result is a loop. Fear propels hesitation, hesitation fuels more fear, and the page stays blank while the clock keeps time. The wall of dread isn't simply laziness. It's a protective shield that backfires as soon as starting feels like stepping into a spotlight. In high-achieving minds, the same tools that can solo a problem can also inflate the pressure to perform perfectly. Procrastination isn't a sign you're lazy. It's a signal that your brain is buffering against a threat you've invented. The brain's fire alarm lights up, the amygdala sends out sparks, and the executive center hesitates. You overthink, shaping elaborate plans, polishing the first sentence in your head until it feels flawless, which never happens on a blank page. The result is that action is delayed while imagination runs ahead, casting too many possible futures and only one certainty: the page remains empty. Here's the brain-based way to break this cycle. Label the feeling as the brain's alarm, not a verdict on your capability. Name the threat and then tilt the odds toward action with tiny, non-threatening steps. The moment you commit to one small move, even just starting with a word, a phrase, or an outline, you pull the prefrontal cortex back online and quiet the amygdala a notch. The perfectionist trap loosens its grip when you redefine starting as exploration, not judgment. Create a small ritual that makes the first move feel safe. Set a timer, open a blank document, and place a rough line or headline without worrying about polish. The wall of dread shrinks when the task is broken into manageable slivers, and the brain recognizes that you're in control again. Environmental design helps the brain too. Reduce the cues that feed perfectionism: a clean, simple workspace, templates that prevent staring at a blank canvas, and a starting prompt that's easy to meet. Use a concrete, low-stakes prompt like write one sentence about the main idea instead of write the perfect introduction. That shift keeps the amygdala from sounding its alarm and invites the prefrontal cortex to take charge. Pair the start with a grounding breath or a quick body check to bring physiology back into balance. Remind yourself that starting doesn't commit you to brilliance, it commits you to momentum. Once you begin, momentum often carries you forward, and the wall of dread dissolves into progress you can refine later. Analysis paralysis: when too many options lead to zero movement. When faced with many choices, the brain can freeze. Analysis paralysis happens when options multiply faster than our brain can evaluate. The mind tries to forecast futures, weigh potential gains against possible costs, and compare countless tiny differences between options. The wall of dread grows as possibilities pile up, because each choice carries effort, risk, and the chance of regret. A simple task, like picking a meal, can become an hour-long battle when the menu feels endless and every dish could be the wrong one. The brain's fire alarm wakes up the moment risk seems present. The amygdala may flare, nudging you toward caution or withdrawal. High standards magnify that signal. The perfectionist trap tightens as you tell yourself that the perfect option must exist somewhere, just out of reach. More options feel safer because they promise a way to dodge a bad outcome, but they also raise the stakes and the fear of picking imperfectly. With so much at stake, the body leans toward doing nothing rather than risking the wrong start. Smart people often overthink the options because they're good at spotting nuance. Yet this skill can backfire. When every choice looks nearly equal, the mind red flags indecision itself, and motivation drops. People find themselves choosing nothing because they're trying to avoid small mistakes that might compound into larger ones. In real life, that means meetings stall, projects stay in draft, and even simple tasks linger as the sense of what would be wasted or wrong grows larger than the urge to begin. The effect is subtle but powerful. More thinking leads to less doing. A brain-based game plan can flip the script. First, limit the field. Pick a small, clearly defined range of options and stick to it. Second, pre-commit by revealing your plan publicly or writing a simple if-then statement that binds you to a start action. Third, time box the beginning. Vow to work for a tiny slice of time and stop only when the time runs out, not when the task gets perfect. Fourth, start with something you can approve of quickly, even if it's not glamorous: a stub, a frame, a rough outline. Fifth, lower the pressure with a good enough mindset, not a perfect one. The moment you begin, the wall of dread eases, the fire alarm quiets, and momentum grows. You don't need every option to be perfect to make real progress. You only need the first step to move. The dopamine trap. Why we trade long-term success for short-term comfort. Neuroscience shows dopamine fuels reward seeking in the brain. It happens to many. When you anticipate a payoff, dopamine rises and nudges you toward actions that feel rewarding in the moment. That setup is the essence of the dopamine trap. Short-term pleasures light up the same circuits as big long-term goals, which can tilt you toward immediate relief instead of sustained effort. The brain's fire alarm, an overactive amygdala response to effort or uncertainty, can make starting feel risky. The wall of dread rises before you begin, and the urge to retreat into tiny distractions grows. Smart people are not immune. They often overthink and expect near-perfect outcomes, and that expectation triggers the perfectionist trap, where the fear of not meeting standards makes any starting feel pointless. Starting a task requires pushing through the brain's resistance, and the brain likes to conserve energy. The brain is efficient. High standards amplify resistance, because the next moment bears the weight of potential error. The pressure to be flawless activates worry rather than momentum. The wall of dread isn't just a moment. It's a mental barrier that grows with pictures of fouled-up drafts and messy results. When the mind imagines a messy outcome, the brain rewards the avoidance that follows with quick hits of comfort from screens or snacks. The dopamine system, tuned to seek rewards, can prefer a pleasant distraction to a hard, uncertain step. To loosen the trap, small starts work best. Begin with a tiny action that is almost impossible to get wrong. Type one sentence, open the document, jot down one bullet. The 2-minute rule helps. Tell yourself you'll work for just 2 minutes. If you stop after 2, you still won't lose much, and often you'll keep going. The key is to create a bridge from intention to action. Implementation intentions help. If I sit at my desk, then I will write 1 paragraph before checking emails. Temptation bundling pairs a short bite of task with a preferred activity, so you get a reward while you work. Hide the phone, move the notifications out of sight, and put the task list where you can see it. Set a timer and let the first step be small and concrete. Reframing turns the wall into a doorway. Reframe the task as an experiment rather than a verdict on your worth. That reduces the brain's threat response and dampens the brain's fire alarm. Start with curiosity. What does a good first draft look like? Create concrete milestones and celebrate tiny wins to reset dopamine toward momentum. For instance, commit to drafting an outline in 15 minutes, then review what you wrote, and then decide on the next tiny step. The approach is to ride the wave of dopamine by feeding it small, reliable rewards for consistent starting. With practice, the urge for quick comfort loses its grip and your smarter, longer-term plans begin to move. The good enough strategy, hacking your brain to lower the stakes. Smart people often procrastinate because their brains treat big tasks as high-stakes threats. The wall of dread rises before the first keystroke, a barrier built by the fear of not meeting standards. The brain's fire alarm goes off, signaling danger at the moment a task feels hard or uncertain. The perfectionist trap whispers that anything less than flawless will be a failure, so the safest move is to wait. In that moment, starting feels reckless, and action stalls while the mind searches for more data, more reassurance, more polish. This is where the good enough strategy steps in. It's not a license to abandon quality. It's a practical hack to release your brain from the grip of fear and to create momentum. The core idea is simple. Aim for a clearly defined, tiny result that moves you forward, and then refine later if needed. You decide what good enough looks like in advance, so the brain doesn't freeze when faced with an open-ended task. You break the task into a micro-deliverable, something you can complete quickly and showcase as evidence of progress. When you do this, the amygdala calms down and the prefrontal cortex can concentrate on the next small step rather than re-evaluating the entire project. Consider these concrete ways to put good enough into practice. Start by choosing a minimal output that still advances the goal. Write a rough paragraph instead of a finished page, draft 3 bullet points for a presentation, or sketch a rough diagram instead of a polished design. Set a timer and commit to completing that microtask within the window. If you finish, you get a small win that releases dopamine and nudges you toward the next step. If you stall, switch to another tiny component and avoid chasing perfection at once. The point is to build a chain of quick wins, not a single, flawless triumph. In real life, the method looks like this. You name the essential outcome, define what done looks like for that outcome, and then execute a tiny version of it. You guard against polish as the enemy of progress by telling yourself the polish comes after the milestone, not before. You can pair the approach with external cues, an accountability buddy, a visible deadline, or a simple if-then plan. If I start, then I finish the first microtask. The 2-minute rule can help too. If a task can be launched in a couple of minutes, do it now. The aim is to reduce fear, not to abandon standards, and to replace hesitation with a string of quick, real-world results. With practice, the wall of dread loses its grip, the perfectionist trap softens, and the brain learns that starting is often the hardest part, but not the end of the story. The 5-minute entry: trick your nervous system into working. The brain treats a task that feels big as a threat, and the alarm goes off. That alarm, the amygdala, can make you stall and stare at the wall. In smart people, high standards add weight to that wall. The wall of dread grows taller when every step must be flawless, complete, and perfect. You want to protect yourself from the tiny risk of failure, so you delay. This is the pattern known as procrastination, not a sign of laziness. It's a misfire in how the brain handles starting. The 5-minute entry is a practical doorway through that wall. You promise yourself 5 minutes and 1 micro-action. The action is so small it requires almost no decision. Open the document, type 1 sentence, jot down a heading, or pull up a file and preview it. You set a timer and dive in. With the timer ticking, you cut off the long, scary horizon and focus on a single, doable moment. If the task is a report, you might write the title and the first line. If it's studying, you open the textbook, turn to a page, and read a paragraph. If it's cleaning, you pick up and put away one batch of items. The key is the tiniest spark that starts the engine. The brain starts to shift as you begin. Tiny progress lights up the reward circuits with a small dopamine nudge, enough to say, "We can do more." The wall of dread loses its grip once the initial motion is in play. The brain's fire alarm quiets as uncertainty drops, because you've reduced risk to a 5-minute experiment rather than an all-day mission. Momentum builds in the basal ganglia and prefrontal areas that govern effort and planning, so the next step feels less like a leap and more like a continuation. The perfectionist trap loosens its grip because you're not chasing flawless output, you're chasing a tiny, real start. In practice, this works across tasks. For a writing task, the 5-minute entry might be opening the document, typing a header, and writing a single sentence. For a coding project, you could open the repository, check the latest commit, and implement a 1-line change. For a presentation, you might drop in a title slide and jot down 3 bullet points. The point is to lower the barrier enough that decision fatigue disappears and action becomes automatic. If you still feel dread after 5 minutes, you can reassess. Often, you'll find you want to keep going, because the brain has already tasted a small win and wants another one. You don't need more time, you need a safer brain environment. Procrastination isn't laziness. It's the brain doing a quick risk check when the stakes feel high. Smart people often hit this wall because goals seem close, yet the path to them feels uncertain. The amygdala, the brain's fire alarm, lights up at uncertainty or judgment, signaling danger even when there's no real danger. That signal travels through the body, tightening shoulders, quickening breath, and slowing thinking. The prefrontal cortex, which would normally map steps and regulate impulses, can lose bandwidth under stress. Stress hormones rise, and the mind latches onto avoidance as a way to regain calm. The result is delay, a pause that buys safety but erodes momentum over time. The wall of dread grows taller with every moment of hesitation, and starting to chip away at it feels risky, not rewarding. The perfectionist trap makes the first move feel like a verdict rather than a try. When standards loom so large that any tiny misstep seems unforgivable, the brain calculates the price of starting as too high. The fear of making a wrong move can overwhelm the tendency to act, so action stalls. We know this in practical terms. People postpone because the next step might expose mistakes, and mistakes feel costly in a world that prizes precision. The brain then shifts into a kind of protective overthinking, which blunts motivation and dampens dopamine signals that normally reward small progress. In this state, even a simple outline can look inadequate, so nothing gets done. The atmosphere around the task, the judgment of others, the glare of an ambitious deadline, the sense that time is slipping, amplifies the sensation of danger. That's how high standards fuel inaction, even when intelligence and ability are high. To tilt the balance, you want a safer brain environment. Start by naming a tiny, non-threatening first action. Write a single sentence fragment, jot a rough topic, or copy a structure from a model. Any small act that is low risk reduces the brain's barrier to entry. A template or checklist also helps, because it removes ambiguity. When the goal feels less open-ended, the amygdala quiets a bit and the prefrontal cortex can begin to map a plan. Create a workspace that minimizes sensory triggers, a clean desk, limited interruptions, a predictable routine. The brain's fire alarm quiets when the environment promises safety. Pair the task with a simple ritual. Open the notebook, take a breath, start typing a line. These cues turn starting into a predictable, repeatable moment rather than a jump into the unknown. Accountability can reinforce safety without shaming. Share a plan with a friend or colleague and promise to deliver a rough draft or a single paragraph by a concrete time. External feedback, even rough and imperfect, provides quick reinforcement and lowers the fear of invisible judgment. Break tasks into microsteps that feel doable. For a report, begin with a heading, then a single sentence that states the purpose. For a project, outline 3 bullet points. These steps create immediate, tangible wins that the brain recognizes and rewards, nudging you to repeat the behavior. The aim is not to erase standards, but to translate them into a safe pathway that the brain can trust again. Dopamine loves progress, even tiny progress, and it will cheer you on with renewed energy to continue. You don't need more time, you need a safer brain environment. In practice, this means designing the moment so starting feels secure, not dangerous. When you're tempted to chase perfection, tell yourself that a good enough start is a legitimate destination, not a final verdict. Use micro-actions, clear templates, and an orderly space to reduce uncertainty. Let failure be information, not indictment, and protect the initial sting of risk with gentle structure. With these changes, the mind stops treating starting as a plunge and begins treating it as a series of safe, repeatable moves. The result is momentum, even on days when motivation is quiet or the task feels tall. Here's the brain science in plain language. Smart people procrastinate because high standards create a gap between what you want to deliver and what you believe you can deliver. The perfectionist trap whispers that unless you can do it perfectly, you shouldn't start. The brain's fire alarm rings when starting feels risky, so you freeze. The wall of dread makes even small tasks look like mountains. Starting small rewires that moment. When you move a microstep, your brain registers a win, and a tiny nudge of dopamine pushes you to go a bit further. Momentum builds and the fear eases a little. Here's a brain-friendly plan you can try now. Pick one thing you can do in 2 minutes or less. Attach it to a cue you already have, like after you pour your coffee or before you jump into a meeting. Promise yourself, if I start, I will work on this for 2 minutes. After those 2 minutes, check in. Do I want to keep going or stop? If you still don't want to continue, switch to another tiny action or adjust the setup to remove friction. Move the file window within reach, open the document, grab the pen. Tell a friend or a family member what you're trying to start. Accountability helps. Allow imperfect results for the first try. You can revisit and revise later. If you've felt this before, you're not alone. A lot of smart, capable people run into this wall, and a tiny start is often enough to tip the balance. Try the 2-minute start today and drop a comment with the first tiny task you'll begin. If you want more science-backed moves, hit subscribe. Next time we'll map out how to turn big projects into a chain of tiny, doable steps and build a simple weekly routine that keeps momentum going. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.